Okay, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Does anybody have any questions before I get started? All right, good morning, everybody. We'll get going with this. We have just a little bit left with where are we at? Chapter 24, I believe. We should, oh, I shouldn't say that. I see it right here, figure 24. So we should be able to wrap this one up and get started with the next chapter, which is the blood and lymphatic system. At least the littlest bit into that, I assume. We'll see as we get to the tail end of this with all of the parasites. I could probably talk about them for 4 days. Okay. Oh, I just skipped right over that and didn't even mention them. So initially, rotavirus, we got a couple of different viruses that we're going to see in the table here in a second, but rotavirus is the only one we've got a micrograph of. These guys, roto or rota, wheel-shaped or kind of pinwheel-shaped as we look at these guys. I remember back in the day as I was an undergraduate taking a virology class, I remembered rotaviruses associated with the GI tract because roto-rooter, the guy that'll come and clean your drains, it's a crappy job, and rotavirus is the same, right? All crappy. So that's how I remembered these guys, and I still think of roto-rooter when I see rotaviruses. That I should be getting some sort of kickbacks from roto-rooter. They should clean my drains for free. Free advertising right there. All right. So rotavirus, all of these three have issues with gastroenteritis. Symptom-wise, relatively similar as we move through here. There are a few things that may be a little bit different, like with the norovirus, the potential maybe for some projectile vomiting. You know, that's serious business. They have various potentials. We think rotavirus, pretty good one with little kids. If your immune system starts to become weakened, as we think aging process, you set the stage for having more issues with rotavirus as well, where you actually see some ill effects. The norovirus is kind of a free-for-all. Little kids definitely common with that, but it's maybe more so issues or concerns with close contact, close living quarters, or potentially, norovirus. Almost always you hear about issues, back in the day when cruise ships were actually a thing. Norovirus was something that was really a pretty common occurrence in these situations. You're all together, close quarters, typically lots of buffet sorts of dining. That sets the stage for ease of transmission. Technically, all of them kind of, we think, sort of fecal oral situation, relatively contagious to highly contagious with the norovirus. So all different, slightly, if we looked at them, you know, with an electron micrograph, their appearances would be different, but that matters not. All right, we don't care what these guys look like. So fever, diarrhea, headache, kind of commonalities, like we said, maybe some projectile vomiting that might set it apart a little bit. Most of these things we think about ELISA tests, enzyme immunoassays to detect. And with many, we think kind of just it runs its course, couple of days, potentially a little bit longer with some of these fluid replacements, but other than that, probably not much. There are some potentials with rotavirus with some vaccine, but others not. All right. So shifting away from those guys, we want to think about a handful of different hepatitis. Okay, I knew I had a picture of them. A handful of different hepatitis viruses. And there is a table in the text. I'm not sure if it's in this PowerPoint or not, but I will shift over to it here in just a second. That goes through and describes these guys in a little bit more detail. So you can see a broad spectrum of different appearing hepatitis viruses. They have some similarities and some differences. Their modes of transmission varied with hepatitis A and E. We think of these guys being transmitted by a fecal oral transmission, a contaminative type of transmission. B, C, and D, we think more fluid stuff, blood, semen as a potential for the transmission of these types of viruses. There's issues with this, with the blood, with IV drug use, the potential to transmit B, C, and D. And like I said, there is a table that goes through and talks about this. We can see some naked and enveloped viruses as well, and I know that's talking about it down within there. We don't need to go through all of the details with that. So hepatitis is inflammation, enlargement within the liver, and various potentials for it to progress and cause possibly very severe infection, maybe even the potential for the damage to wind up with different types of liver cancer as a result, and possibly lending to cirrhosis as well. So as we see this image, we start off in the individual with a healthy liver, and then we look at the little cutout with the inflamed liver. The jaundice, you get a yellow tint or tinge to the skin. The whites of the eyes are definitely a characteristic sign where they become very yellowed. And I think there's maybe another image with that here in just a second. So very good indication that jaundice is occurring where the bilirubin is not being broken down properly. That should be happening within the liver, and it ultimately results in this yellowing that you see. Maybe, quite possibly, your first indication that you've got some sort of problems going on, all right? And by that point, maybe the damage is relatively severe. So it's definitely an issue with that. All right, I need to switch out of this real quickly. Okay. Nope, not now. So I already, that table showed up just fine. Where was my next bit? Here we go. The different hepatitis. So I don't know why the one table looked just fine PowerPoint wise and this one not. You never know. All right. So like I said, and we saw that image, Hepatitis A and E, we think of the fecal oral transmission and, you know, different sorts of possibilities with that, where it could be, you know, hepatitis A, you potentially hear issues with maybe some cook at a restaurant that has tested positive, and then they mention, you know, if you happened to eat at this establishment during this window of time, you might want to get tested. All right. That's this person to person. There are various potentials with this, oftentimes asymptomatic. It sets the stage for issues because it definitely increases the likelihood that it will be transmitted because you don't recognize that you've got it in the first place, right? It might be self-limiting, couple of week resolution. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer, and there are potentials, rare, but there are potentials for it to result in fulminant hepatitis that can be fatal. So there is vaccine available with A, recommended for little kids, 1-year-old, and then individuals at high risk, also potential for that. Like I said, B, C, and D, we think about blood or other body fluids as a potential with all three of these, and various potentials as we move through here. D is kind of a special one. We'll hit him in just 1 second. All right. So hepatitis B, it's similar to type A, but it can progress to cirrhosis, and from that can lend to liver failure. It's also one, as we see the damage occurring within the liver, that can be quite severe, sets the stage for changes that can cause liver cancer. So a couple of different treatments and vaccine potential with B. Hepatitis C, another one that's commonly asymptomatic, 75 to 85%. We can see being chronic carriers, and it also, like B, has the potential to progress to cirrhosis and liver failure, also cancer. All similar modes of transmission as type B. And there are, as far as treatment goes, kind of depends on the different genotypes and whether or not we're seeing cirrhosis within the patient constitutes the possibility of treatment. Hepatitis D, like I said, kind of an odd one. So it's similar to B, typically self-limiting, a couple of weeks, but can have some chronic situations. The kicker with this guy is you only see ill effects if you are co-infected with hepatitis B. If you don't have hepatitis B, you don't recognize any issues at all, right? Which is interesting, all right? And so as a preventative for D, a vaccine against B will protect you from that, all right? And if you happen to have both, well, it's ultimately more of a situation as far as the outcome goes. And then lastly, E, I mentioned it as we started. E and A, both fecal oral transmission, possibility for, you know, undercooked or poorly cooked meat sets the stage, other food products and water, all fecal contamination ultimately that sets the stage with that. Also, typically pretty mild, self-limiting, so it really sort of just depends on your circumstances, right? With that, let me switch back. Okay. So shifting over from our viral organisms, we want to think now about some other players. We want to think about initially Cryptosporidium, this type of parasite. These guys, you know, summer months, hoping that swimming pools and stuff like that might be a thing this summer. Maybe. Cryptosporidium is a common thing that you will see. Swimming pools are closed due to issues. The issues typically are this. And, you know, it's usually some little kid that does their business in the pool and in turn contaminates it. And cryptosporidium is very common, right? And it is associated with water like swimming pools. Here we can see with immunofluorescent staining, the cryptosporidium popping up, kind of cool looking bright green. Cyclospora, these guys also pretty interesting to me. Cyclospora canadiensis is a parasite that I think I would say relatively newly recognized as a human pathogen. That doesn't mean that it's just barely started to infect us, but we've relatively recently recognized this potential, right? And you know, developing tests to diagnose and all of these things really very recent, all right? This is a pretty common parasite. We think about it being transmitted fecal oral sort of situations, again, through contamination. So things, produce potentially getting contaminated, different types of products may or may not be rinsed before they make it to the supermarket in the first place. You should wash your produce, all right? That should definitely be something that you think about, all right? This guy is definitely one that has been found, and it's relatively common on things like raspberries, other things, maybe different types of herbs that you could potentially be buying at the store that are fresh, like live basil. Also a potential for contamination. Raspberries I want to talk about for 1 second. This type of berry is very fragile. You pick raspberries, you wash them, and you see they maybe don't tolerate that very well. Oftentimes, or maybe we'll say back in the day, raspberries were picked, packed, and put into the supermarket, never washed. People would buy these raspberries in their nice little container and potentially open that container up and just eat those suckers, eat them on the way home. Delicious, fresh raspberries, right? But those suckers were never washed, right? And that's where these issues started to be recognized, right? And tracing things back through some foodborne outbreaks, some specific desserts with fresh raspberries incorporated into the dessert, made lots of people sick, right? And serious diarrhea for a couple of weeks, where they're wondering, why am I crapping myself to death? That's when these suckers got recognized, all right, as a potential issue, all right? So really pretty crazy stuff, all right? If you buy raspberries at the supermarket, I recommend that you wash them. Most of these things now, you will see they do say that they have been washed. Maybe not though, all right? So you definitely want to use caution. There are other potentials with some of these things. It depends on where they're coming from. If you go to some areas, there might be a greater likelihood of contamination. And if that produce is coming from those areas during certain times of the year, like rainy seasons, early May, the end of April, maybe, we're coming right up. If you start seeing raspberries in the supermarket, I'd be cautious. That's when you've got a greater potential, right? Not that I don't want you to eat your fruits and vegetables, right? Just think about it a little bit. I should have left the textbook open because I didn't realize we were going to go immediately to another table. That's okay. I almost clicked end. That's what I know. That's what you guys would prefer. All right. All right, so some more protozoal diseases, and like like I said, as we start with these parasites, uh, I just love them, man. All right, we didn't talk or didn't see an image of our amoeba. Entamoeba histolytica causes amoebiasis or amoebic dysentery. It is a very common one if you travel abroad and you think about some of these like traveler's diarrhea sorts of situations. E. coli is a very common one. Entamoeba histolytica, also a common one, but in this case, a protozoal form of the diarrhea or the traveler's diarrhea. So mild, often we think of mild bouts of diarrhea, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can go to a very severe dysentery. There is the potential for these amoeba to break through the intestine. They typically form little lesions. It almost looks like if you looked at it microscopically, it almost looks like a flask, kind of bell-shaped lesion that occurs, all right? That lesion can progress and ultimately perforate the bowel, allowing the amoeba to move and cause other issues. Typically, the liver is the first place that they take up residence and start to destroy liver tissue as they're feeding on that. They may possibly decide to continue to move, perforating the diaphragm and making their way up into the lungs. If that happens, prognosis is very poor, right? Typically, when that occurs, it's almost always a fatal infection, right? So it can be super bad news. Most of the time, mild bout of diarrhea, right? Other times, if it does truly progress, it can be a definite issue, right? So fecal oral transmission, this amoeba forms cysts in the environment. And so ingestion of this water, you consume these cysts, there's the potential for it to be on food. If the food was rinsed with some of this contaminated water, or your hands were dirty and have those cysts on them, you ultimately have the potential to consume that. So you can do some fecal floats and see the amoeba. Different azole drugs are treatments against that. There are other potentials if we see liver involvement or other stuff where we may need to go in and remove that. Crazy stuff. Cryptosporidosis, Cryptosporidium parvum. We mentioned this, swimming pool, other stuff. So watery diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, dehydration. There's potentials with that in most all of these. Again, fecal oral situation, coming in contact with feces from different animals sets the stage, and then other stuff, swimming, bathing. I mentioned swimming pools. It's classic for that to occur. So Cyclospora catiensis, explosive diarrhea. That's a good one. Fever, nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, and again, food or water sets the stage for that. Lastly on this list, last but not least, giardiasis, Giardia lamblia, or duodenalis. Giardia, it's got a handful of different names that we will accept. Parasitology textbook talks about these guys as duodenalis because that's where you would expect to find the bulk of them. I don't know why intro micro always, they don't change. They change all sorts of different names and new edition, but Giardia changes their name, decade ago. And we still talk about Giardia lamblia in here. That's fine. I guess it hurts my feelings a little bit, all right? But it's okay. So Giardia lamblia, this is awesome. It's disturbing. It is one of the most common parasitic infections in Idaho for sure. I believe probably, as far as like protozoal infections, probably the entire United States. It's pretty common, all right? There are lots of parasites that you got to go elsewhere to contract them, all right? Entamoeba histolytica, you're not going to get that here. It's not endemic. You don't, it's not something you're just going to pick up. Giardia, definitely a possibility, all right? If you like the outdoors, hiking sets you at risk if you decide this water looks crystal clear and delicious. I'm going to have a drink of that. It's highly likely that you ingest some of these cysts and you get ill, all right? It's really relatively common, all right? If you go hiking, there are oftentimes you will see signs posted warning you to either not drink the water or to use filtration devices or boil the water to purify it. Ultimately, for Giardia, there are some other things as well, but Giardia is one of the main culprits, right? Issues with these, there's all sorts of possibilities for problems. It may be asymptomatic. There are numbers of occurrences where you get it and don't recognize it. We don't have it on here as being asymptomatic, but it can be for sure, all right? Diarrhea is definitely a common symptom with this, but the kicker with it is it doesn't happen right after you've consumed this water. It takes a considerable amount of time, typically at least a month, before you ever start to recognize any issues. And by that time, you probably forgot about this camping trip where you drank this delicious spring water that was the best water you've ever tasted, right? Probably not on the radar that that's why you're crapping yourself to death. And you're pretty sure if you've got this, that you're crapping yourself to death, all right? I mentioned before, you get some bouts of GI stuff and the first thing on your mind is Taco Bell, right? You're like, oh, right? I knew it, right? Most of those things, give it a day or two, right? You've got a little bit of foodborne illness after typically a day, but maybe 2 days, you're good to go. You're back in action, all right? Giardia doesn't do that to you, all right? That's why I say you're pretty sure you're crapping yourself to death, all right? It doesn't go away, all right? You still have these issues, and it's bad, all right? The parasite loves all sorts of stuff that you are feeding on, and it feeds on it instead of you. So you don't get a lot of nutrients. You get a lot of malabsorption because the parasite has basically taken up massive amounts of area. It can ultimately cover every single cell within the duodenum for sure, all right? So as we're moving into the intestine, all of the sudden, it's full of parasite. And these cells that should be absorbing nutrients can't. That sets the stage for some pretty massive diarrhea, cramps, gas, greasy stools, as lipid metabolism is basically non-existent. I would say, folks, this is not a weight loss idea, all right? Not a good way to do it, all right? So all sorts of potentials. It's a good one for other potentials, all right? Oftentimes, if you've got a dog and you go camping, you take the dog with you, all right? He'd be pretty pissed off if you didn't, right? How could you do that without me, right? The dog, if you go camping, as soon as you get there, the first thing they're going to do is probably jump right into the water and take a big drink, all right? Dogs get Giardia too, right? And there's also potentials for them to share it with maybe the little ones in your family, all right? As the dog drinks out of its dog dish, little kids tend to play in the dog dish, and then they put their fingers in their mouths, all right? Little kids do that, all right? If you don't have them, just wait, all right? You'll see, all right? It happens, all right? And if that dog happens to contract it, it could potentially, through drinking water contaminate the bowl, and set the stage to infect your little dudes. All right, there's definitely possibilities with that. So there are some different drugs, metronidazole. This guy they call Flagyl. It is a relatively quick anti-parasitic treatment. About 5 days, you take these pills and it runs its course. With some severe cases of Giardia, they may double it up and you take it for about 2 weeks. But usually that's enough, all right? Giardia, I think we mentioned these guys way back when Leeuwenhoek was making his little microscopes and looking at all sorts of things. Giardia was one of the things that he looked at from his own diuretic stool. All right, he was infected with these guys, and he had massive amounts. All right, in parasitology, I mentioned a little bit about some details with this, and if you are in full-blown infection and you are presenting with copious amounts of diarrhea, you see the trophozoite stage, the active feeding stage of these parasites, and there are the potential for billions of these parasites, billions of these little Giardia in a single diuretic stool, all right? That is awesome. And that's not infective, all right? If that stool is able to actually be solid, you can dehydrate it the littlest bit, absorb some of this water, so your symptoms subside a little bit, all right? Then what you present with aren't the trophozoites, but the cyst stage, and it's the cyst stage that's infective. So dependent upon the fecal specimen, will dictate what you might be seeing, active little parasites, the trophozoites, or the resting stage, those cysts. Either way, all right? And like I said, the cysts are what's infective. There's other potentials. I just can't quit talking about Giardia. You have situations where, I mentioned your dog as a possibility. There are definitely possibilities where people decide they want to put their beverages in the stream to keep them nice and cool, all right? The cysts can get on that can and can ultimately inoculate you that way. Other people have contracted it by putting watermelon in the stream to get it nice and cool before they cut it open and eat it at their picnic. That also has caused issues as you slice through that melon, inoculating it with these cysts, and then everybody eats watermelon and gets Giardia. Awesome, all right? Not that I want you to stay out of the outdoors, but you ought to think about it a little bit, all right? And if you're getting in the water, you might want to use a little bit of caution, all right? I would still get in there, right? It's okay. I'm just not going to drink it, all right? All right. And if I got a bout of diarrhea, I'm blaming Taco Bell. It couldn't be Giardia. All right. Enough of that. Let me stop this. I probably should have just scrolled down. Okay. I am on the right slide. Now I am. So we want to shift over a little bit and move from the protozoal parasites and start thinking about some worms, the helminths. There is a plethora of worms. And again, I could talk about these guys for days. I will try to not. There are numerous possibilities for different types of worms. There are some flatworms. What we're looking at here are roundworms. The flatworms can be divided into two different types, like a fluke or a trematode or a tapeworm that we call a cestode. And then the roundworms are nematodes, right? And with all three of these players, there are numerous possibilities for all sorts of pretty impressive infections, right? This first one that we're looking at, Ascaris, Ascaris lumbricoides, these guys have the potential to cause some serious issues, intestinal blockage, as you see here. As I look at these things and the whole handful of worms, I like to say, you know, a true buttload of worms, right? That's a massive amount of worms. There are definitely some images out there if you are so inclined where you can see all of these and potentially what he's got in the hand coming right out of a small child. That's disturbing, all right? So the potential with this blockage could result in a fatal infection, all right? Oftentimes with treatment, you present with this the following morning, all right? So this, as it says here, was excreted by a child. It is definitely common with that, with them. And it's more, you know, contamination sort of situation. So here we can see an egg. It's this egg that's ingested. So, you know, fecal oral contamination, fingers in the soil, into the mouth, that sets the stage, all right? And dependent upon the amount of eggs ingested results in the number of worms. These guys aren't replicating inside of you, all right? It's not one worm gives you a buttload, all right? It's eating copious amounts of eggs gives you all of these worms, all right? So there's definitely some potentials for serious issues. And I know there are numerous YouTube videos that go through some details of this and show potentially people in the process of getting them removed. If you are interested in that type of stuff, feel free, check it out. I will not, I won't show you that, but it is impressive. This next one, there are a number of types of hookworms, all right? And I'm kind of sad. This first one, Ankylostoma canium, it's attached to an intestinal wall. I'm assuming in an animal, not in us, all right? Likely in a dog, all right? Why am I saying that? Because over here, this is what would be happening in us, all right? The ankylostoma, said there's a handful of these hookworms. Ankylostoma duodenale infects people, all right? And it would be within our intestines. Ankylostoma, somebody else, all right? Canum or some others. Well, we're the wrong host. And there's different mechanisms within our bodies that basically prevents these worms from really being able to get where they need to go. So they get into us, but they stay localized. In this case, these worms, it's the larval stage, juvenile forms of these worms that are in the environment, all right? And coming in contact, bare skin to the soil sets the stage for the larvae to penetrate through the skin. And in this case, with the wrong species, it stays localized within the skin. And it causes what we call cutaneous larval migrans. So they stay right within the skin, creeping around. You see this inflammation, all of these little tracks. It's the result of this worm moving through under the skin and leaving basically signs, the swelling as a result of some of its metabolites that our body reacts against. Awesome and disturbing, all right? There are some other types that go deeper and don't cause the cutaneous migrans. It's visceral. So they move into the organs and cause damage, but still wrong species, all right? We're not the right one. It's not making it to the intestine like it wants, all right? So I'm assuming maybe the table will mention this. I didn't spend that much time looking at it. The Ankylostoma duodenale causes human infection. Necator americanus is another type of hookworm, and it also targets us, all right? Necator, it's the larval stage only that penetrates through the skin. Ankylostoma is a little bit special, and the larval stage penetrates through the skin, but eggs can also be ingested, so fecal oral contamination sets the stage with the right species for them to develop within our intestines, all right? And with that, these guys relatively small, even the ones infecting us, a handful of them, less than 25 or so, which seems like a lot of worms in the first place, but less than 25, you may not even recognize you've got any ill effects whatsoever, all right? If we're talking the ones causing the larval migrans, you're gonna know it, right? You see it on your skin. But if it's the right guys that make it into your intestines, and they will travel through, they penetrate into your skin, they make their way into the circulation, to the lungs, hacked up, swallowed down, and then into the intestines. Awesome and disturbing, all right? So it's kind of dosage dependent. You get more than 25, you start seeing ill effects, all right? And you get 100 or more, potentially really ill effects, anemia, and other issues may result. Here's an egg in part C. And like I said, with the ankylostoma, they may be infective as well, especially the duodenalis that gets people. This next one, Enterobius vermicularis. This is called the pinworm. Sometimes they call it the seat worm. This is a common parasitic infection. I think we showed this guy before. Maybe, I feel like we've talked about pinworms. So these guys, here's some eggs. They kind of look like little coffee beans, although we're not seeing any color here. They're often dark brown. So this might be what we recognize in the clinic, and it can be diagnostic. Here are the pinworms themselves, a couple of them right here. They're also very small, a couple millimeters, right? So Enterobius, these guys, and with the nematodes, the roundworms, they are what we call dioecious. So they're separate sexes, males and females, pair up, mate, and in turn, the female, in typically the very early hours, while you're still sleeping, she migrates to the anus, pokes through, and lays her eggs. The male dies very shortly after copulation. The female deposits eggs. There is the potential maybe for a couple of egg depositions before she dies. And ultimately, these eggs seed the environment. They are very, it's very likely that they get kind of all over the place. It is a highly contagious disease. And it is also something that is super mild. You may be infected with these guys and have no symptoms whatsoever. You might have a little bit of issues. If you're a little kid, probably more concerns, right? Irritability, maybe some butt scratching could be a common occurrence that you're seeing in a little kid. If it's yourself, that should be a red flag. You got something going on, right? Little kid, that should still be a flag. There's potential issues. And it can be the result of irritation and the egg deposition that causes these problems. Scotch tape prep is what they typically talk about doing to detect this stuff. So like I said, typically wee hours of the early morning, you go in thinking probably your little kid, pull down the underwear or the diaper, take a little piece of tape, stick it to the anus, and then if it has laid eggs, they will be right on there. And when you observe them under the microscope, that's what we're looking at right here, are eggs that are stuck to the tape, all right? Interesting and disturbing. And if you are a parent that has just been told your kid's got pinworms, I assume you probably go a little bit crazy. All right. They oftentimes, and it's typically the mom that they describe this happening to, but it doesn't have to be. All right. They call it a pinworm psychosis. You go nuts, right? And if you didn't have a little OCD, by the time you are told your kid has this, all of a sudden it's just like, oh, what the heck? I have to clean the entire house. I have to sterilize it. I have to decontaminate it from the ceiling to the floor and everything in between. All of the clothing, all of the bedding, all of the stuffed animals, all of that stuff has to be decontaminated. Drapes and upholstery, everything needs to be decontaminated. Do you think you got it all? I bet you didn't. All right. And that's the psychosis. All right. And just when you think it's all fine and good, oh no, it's not. All right. And they've got it again. All right. You go into the clinic, they'll prescribe you some drugs. All right. And as you leave, they're probably laughing because they know it's probably not going to be effective. And deep down, you really don't have any ill effects. It's not life-threatening, right? And there you go, all right? Disturbing, impressive, and like I think I said, fun for the whole family. All right, enough of that. And this is definitely more disturbing and relatively gross. So Trichuris trichura, these are what we call the whipworm. It looks like a little whip. Here's some of the eggs. You can see the operculum up on here. So the eggs, infective, you get the adult worm. Infection with this does have the potential to result in rectal prolapse, relatively common in little kids. Also, infection with this causes a stunting of their growth. It causes finger clubbing, so the tips of the fingers get very wide as a result of that infection. Another symptom of that, there's numerous possibilities. I told you I was going to start the next chapter, but I can tell at this point there's no point in that. I've only got a couple of slides left and we will quit. This next image, Trichinella spiralis. These are another type of roundworm. So this image right here, we're seeing muscle. This could likely be the muscle from an animal like a pig, pretty common in them. There are some others that can have trichinella as well. Bears are a potential, so it's not just pork that may harbor it, but they definitely are more common, especially thinking around here. So here's a kind of a blow up with this, the larvae within there kind of coiled up. This one is bear meat, all right? So the issues in either circumstance here, these parasites have encysted in the musculature. Sometimes, you know, you may see something like this and see little kind of grainy bits in the meat and may have it, see it described as being kind of mealy. That's maybe an issue, and it could be something like trichinella. If that meat is cooked thoroughly, it kills these parasites, kills these cysts, and you may not recognize it at all that you were ingesting these parasites, and you won't get sick. If that meat's not cooked thoroughly, or if it's eaten raw, it sets the stage for these parasites, the larvae that's encysted in the musculature, to basically hatch out and cause infection, right? And trichinella in us wants to get into the intestines. That's where it would take up residence and start causing infection. But there's also potentials with trichinella. It's a little bit special. And ingestion of the egg, so poor hygiene, fecal oral contamination, ingestion of these eggs sets the stage for the larvae to develop and encysted within musculature in your own body. So you could serve as the actual host, harboring the adult worm in your intestine, and you can serve as an intermediary host, having the larval stage in your musculature. Probably a dead end for that parasite, because I'm willing to bet none of you none of you in the audience, maybe a couple of you tuning in from home, but none of you in the audience are going to be eaten by some sort of wild animal, right? You're probably pretty sure that's not going to happen, right? So if you had these, well, they'll die with you, all right? Not when you're being consumed, all right? All right, shifting over. Taenia solium is pork tapeworm. There are a handful of different tapeworms. This one, similar sort of an idea. The worm itself, the larval stage, would be encysted in musculature in the pig. Poorly cooked meat gives you the adult stage of the worm in your intestine. And similarly to the trichinella, Taenia solium, ingestion of those eggs sets the stage for it to develop cysts within your musculature or even in your brain. Both Taenia and trichinella could potentially encyst within the nervous tissue, and that might be a fatal consequence. So these guys, this is a tapeworm, so a type of flatworm, cestode, multiple segments that we call proglottids. There's suckers, and on the head region, there's also some hooks with the Taenia solium. Taenia saginata, that's the beef tapeworm, just has suckers, no hooks. And it also, if it's only through the ingestion of poorly cooked meat, eggs are not going to be infective in us with the beef tapeworm. There's another one that we see in fish. That's another tapeworm. It's not a Taenia, but it's another one that's common. And ingestion of sushi sets the stage for some types of sushi, sets the stage for the potential to contract that. I think sushi is delicious, and I'm not going to stop eating it. All right, but you got to be cautious. All right, there are definitely some types of fish that might be a little more risky than others. These next guys, these are types of flukes. So another type of flatworm, liver flukes. We got a couple of different ones here, so liver and intestinal. Fasciola hepatica is the liver fluke. And these guys taking up residence within the bile duct of the liver. You often contract this stuff through the ingestion of aquatic plants like watercress. And it is something like, you know, a salad. You don't cook that stuff up, you just eat it. And that sets the stage. If this parasite has insisted on the vegetation, when you consume it, you get the adult stage of the worm. This similar idea, but instead of the liver, it's in the intestines. Okay, and that table basically wraps up all of those guys. I'm right at quitting time, so I won't go through this, but it does list off everything I talked about, plus a couple of other tidbits. So I will leave you off with that. Friday, we will pick up with chapter 25. All right, any questions or concerns? Okay, have a great day, guys. Farewell.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Are we going to have other extra credits?
Yeah, I will get some material posted very soon. I've been trying to get all of that stuff together, but I have been relatively busy this week. I will get stuff posted.
All right, thank you.
You are welcome.